All right, welcome to today's episode. This is Tracy Dent with Holden Advisors with Jeet Mukherjee, Adnan Akbari, and Pete Morelli. Today's topic is understanding cost to serve. So we've had a big focus with our clients about profitability. We've talked a lot about, if you've been watching these videos, a lot about firing unprofitable customers. So understanding cost to serve is a big part of this equation. So I think our starting point is, how do we look at cost to serve different from a traditional accounting perspective?
Yeah, I think most people do some version of ABC costing to look at cost to serve, which makes sense, right? You have units of measurement essentially to look at your large tasks or large activities that a company does, be it process-based or product-based or whatever it might be. Some traditional things are like tech support, customer service, those types of things, right? Which makes perfect sense, and people do really well in measuring those costs to serve. And then there was an article by HBR that talked about time-based elements, because people have time that they go to the bathroom or take breaks or do whatever they need to do, which affects it to make it a little bit more honest, those numbers. So, that's definitely a good look at it. What we find most of our clients, when we talk about pricing, when we talk about firing unprofitable customers or evaluating customer performances within our clients' four walls, they kind of try to get into what are their key limited resources. What are those functions? What are those processes that are limited in nature? So is it, is it sales resource? Is it tech support? Is it whatever, equipment or a process line that's very limited in capacity? They take those 4 or 5 and really have that measurements to understand who the abusive customers are. And I think that's the approach we kind of look at to understand, hey, are there customers out there? The traditional way to look at things is a margin threshold and say, okay, if they're below a margin threshold, of course, those customers need to get evaluated. But what about the ones that are at the threshold or even a little above, but their use of our limited resources are extremely high? Because that would drive them into the bucket of us reviewing them as well. And that's the nuance that we need to kind of understand and get to. And that's kind of what we do with our clients, is to figure out what are those limited resources that we should be looking at that drives a customer's profitability from a long-term perspective.
I think, Jeet, another perspective on that is kind of what you described, the traditional activity-based costing, or the ABC, is that often it could look at a broad swath of different categories and might effectively average out what the gross cost of the business to run the business is, allocated across all of the different products in the portfolio. But often what customers can lack is the ability to look at things incrementally, so that when they're making a decision on, should I take this business on or not, is it profitable on the margin? Because it might be that a lot of the fixed costs are already covered or should not be allocated to some specific volume. And then you have to start thinking about, how do I narrow that scope from kind of everything to, that limited set of things you mentioned, or even further. So you really get to that marginal analysis of what's the benefit and what does it cost me.
Yeah, that's a great point, because the specific nature of that task, to understand it by customer, is super important, because as an example, not all resources are the same. Not all of whatever you're trying to measure are the same. So using a blanket sort of spread the peanut butter across everybody in that one organization is probably not going to be accurate. Sorry.
Yeah, and I've experienced this in a past business that I was a part of, where you traditionally, right, you often will segment based on the size of the customer account. But to the point that you guys are both making, those smaller customers were taking a disproportionate amount of the cost, and therefore their margins looked quite a bit healthier than they actually were, right? Once you have that ability, that level of insight, then you can make some more strategic decisions on where you want to focus from a growth and revenue perspective.
Yeah, that's right. The other thing that what we find from a cost to serve that oftentimes it doesn't take into account is opportunity cost. So if I have a tech support organization, and I'm going to exaggerate to kind of make this point, but if I have a tech support organization and 90% of that utilization is for a customer base that's not very profitable overall, and you only have 10% of that capacity going to your loyal customers or your advocate customers, then what does that say about the future potential of that company, right? If we can switch that around where you spend 90% of your time with your true advocates, then all of a sudden you'll probably have a business that's better in some measurement, right? So that opportunity cost of how your resources are being utilized and for whom is extremely important to understand, because I think you can turn a business around by co-creating with customers, giving them the time with the right customers that they need to grow with you.
That's a great point because, basically, one of the arguments for identifying costs in a lot of different projects for, companies say, oh, well, I'm not going to fire, my customer success team. No, we don't expect you to. It's not that they're literally costing you this extra money. It's that you're allocating them to the wrong folks. And if you can put that attention on the places where you're likely to get more upsell and cross-sell and loyalty, customer lifetime value out of it, that's what you should do.
Yeah.
The other piece that brings transparency into is that point about opportunity cost is from the perspective of securing resources in the right areas, right? If you are going down a path where you say, okay, we are very starved for resources in a particular area, such as tech support, and the costs are disproportionately high, then that gives you the insight and the ability to fix that problem and perhaps secure additional resources or allocate in a more effective way.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing about cost to serve, when it comes to the profitability, measuring the true profitability of a customer and to stack rank them, if we can understand the elements of the costs that are driving the unprofitability, then we can have a corrective action. So it's not always about getting rid of the customers and drawing a hard line and saying, the customers are gone. It's also about understanding where your levers are, so you can pull the right levers to correct the issue that's there. And the problem that, and you guys can probably speak to it as well, is oftentimes that the root causes of the unprofitability is covered up by some promise. We always see like, hey, I like this customer. I know they're not that profitable, but they're going to give us $20 billion in business in the next 3 years, or something like that keeps them on the hook. And it's hard to kind of peel back that onion to really get to those root problems to make those correct decisions on some of these customers.
Have you seen a place where you've been able to kind of uncover an unprofitable area or dynamic, I guess you could say, and been able to flip it without just doing, because I guess the other part is you could also use it as a prompt to do a price increase. But maybe there's another way if you can figure out kind of the root cause and then shift what's not working and fix just what that issue is.
Yeah, for me, there was a client years ago that really took care of their large contracts, so their large customers. And when we did sort of a better in-depth understanding of profitability, we found a lot of these large customers were not profitable. So, and a lot of these large contracts that we had won, we did it through RFPs. And next time around, what we decided was we're going to get those levers up that were driving the unprofitability to course correct. And what we found was a lot of these customers left our environment and they went to competitors. And we found that to be a success because our profitability increased. Our competitors got these terrible deals and they were happy for that boost of revenue, but profitability wasn't there, right? And what we also found was if we ever wanted to get those customers back, we would just lower our prices and they would come back into our environment and our system. So it wasn't that like, these are strategic clients that somehow we were gaining something else by having them in our environment. These guys were very transactional. And I get it. It's a very large piece of business and these are large contracts. I totally understand that. But especially in volatile times, we know this, profitability is king. It's not revenue, it's profitability. And we have to make sure there's long-term profitability. And it's okay to let some of these larger guys go if they don't adhere to your standards that you're putting out there.
I was going to say, Jeet, on a lot of projects that we look at profitability, it's common that we're uncovering unprofitable customers. And before taking kind of a corrective action or giving an ultimatum or deciding to turn the business or letting it expire, you kind of have to look to see, is this a perennial problem where this customer is always the case, or is it really switching year on year? So if you get rid of an unprofitable customer in one year, maybe they're a whale the following year. And so that could be kind of off your nose to spite your face. But when you do uncover a perennial pattern, I think then it kind of goes into the sort of a waterfall is how I like to think about it. It's not just, okay, yeah, they're unprofitable, let's fire them. It's okay, well, what are the terms in the contract that either are expiring next year or can we renegotiate? And maybe one of those levers is that the next one would absolutely be a price increase. And maybe there could be reducing cost to serve with some of the analysis that we've done, whether that's customer service time or any of the other incremental real costs to serve, whether it's expedited shipping or anything else. And then finally, if all of those truly are exhausted, then maybe parting ways is the right answer.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point. Being able to go in and understand what those costs are, give you a better leg to stand on over the course of these negotiations. Because to your point, if certain customers are taking a disproportionate amount of customer support or IT costs, is that something that you could put terms and conditions into play that aren't necessarily price setting and have a more kind of a beneficial relationship on both ends to turn that to turn it to a point where does become more profitable?
Yes, it reminds me of a story. I was negotiating with this one customer, and they were fairly large, and they were using our customer service quite a bit, along with our tech support quite a bit. They were heavy users, and their overall margin, product margin, was very low. So we knew, even without doing any calculation, we knew this customer was not very profitable. What we had set up was sort of a service, like good, better, best from a service perspective. And we had unlimited customer service calls at the highest end. And we called it a brick, but we would put a margin escalation in the product margins if they chose to be in that high part. So the conversation became really easy. We knew the driver of cost for this one customer was customer service. And we knew that and they obviously valued it because they were using it a ton. And we forced them to say, hey, you can keep your low price, but you can't call customer service, but I'm making this number up, but 4 times a day. But if you want to keep your current rate, you're going to have to take on this extra pricing, and you can call unlimited, keep calling the customer service hotline as much as you want. And they chose to go into the larger bucket and paid the higher product price because they really truly valued it. So this is another one of those things where it's an opportunity for us, like you guys were talking about, to understand what is truly valuable and what is just a behavior of just poor behavior of, hey, I lack of resources, I'm just going to call this guy's tech support line. And you can course correct some of those things.
And some of those could just simply be enforcement. I could imagine you uncover some customers that seem unprofitable and you're like, hey, we already have business rules that would make this customer profitable, but through whatever exception, they've been grandfathered into these sweetheart deals.
Yeah, that's a great point too.
Yeah, I mean, I think typically we would never say that some of this cost analysis delves into these value drivers, but that example that you just gave points to the fact that by simple way of conducting this type of analysis for this particular customer, that pointed you in the direction of a value driver and then kind of fed into your pricing strategy, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
I would think too, it's also could be a really nice prompt to kind of get the integrity of the partnership back on track. Like I would imagine for customers that you've worked with over years and things just kind of trend in a direction without resetting or studying those kinds of things, it could keep going a certain way that's really driving the whole partnership in ways that are kind of like an undercurrent, Yeah,
that's a great point. I think sometimes we forget that we get trained by our customers and we also train our customers. And so having this good behavior and making sure you're communicating with your customers, I think it's important. One thing that I know, like we used to get a lot of anecdotes like this is, if you're talking to a customer about their poor behavior and you want to turn them around, as an example, they want 90 days to pay you, and industry standard is 30 days. And that's a huge amount of difference, right? And you keep talking to them, finance keeps talking to them, and they don't want to change, they want 90 days. And finally we go, hey, we're not very profitable with you guys. We're gonna have to let you go and go to our competitors. They go to the competitors. The competitor has a very similar cost structure typically, right? And they're gonna have the same conversation after 6 months of putting up with it. And then they're gonna finally realize at some point going, wait a minute, hold on. Maybe we can't push it to 90. Let's see if we can negotiate to 60. So some of those behaviors do get corrected over time, but that transparency of conversation and holding onto our lines that we're setting for ourselves is super important, because rarely do you have that big of a discrepancy in cost basis where you can go from one competitor to another and have that flexibility to do some of these things.
And without that level of transparency, it's that much harder to have that negotiation, right?
Right.
Because it's as a result of having that, it's rooted in truth, right?
Yeah,
So
that's right. That's right. Tracy, wrap it up for us.
Nice. All right. This is good. I mean, I'm taking notes because I think there's a lot of different threads for us to keep kind of unpacking and studying different examples and doing roundtables like this on it. So we'll definitely pick back up on this as we see new things kind of opening up, and let's pause there for today.
Sounds awesome.
Good.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.